Hello again. It's Gareth Wood, GJ Wood, as it were, back with another story. I'm not sure why it's actually taken me so long to get around to Read Company because of all the short stories that I've written, and in it, this is one of a number that appear in Screaming Blue City Murder by KGHH Publishing. Of all the stories I've written, shorts. This is often seen like the one that's had the best reaction, or it's always had a big reaction, and significantly, a little while ago now, it was picked up by a film studio and turned into a short film, which I think a few of you will have seen. And if you haven't, what I'll do is once I post the story on YouTube, I'll resend the link to the film so you can give it a look. And see how it holds up against the story. I was really pleased with what they did, but any opinions or anything like that, and how you feel about the story as we comment on the video, and on the short film, I'm always really pleased to hear them, good or bad. So without further ado, Company. He'd driven down a street before, and the tops of the heavy doors burnt yellow with faux Victorian lanterns. The large windows stared outwards with glimmering melancholy as the shadows of soft figures drifted across the innards with whale sadness. He breathed in the quiet opulence as his own perfect saloon automobile crawled slowly along, the loosened gravel of the road crackling like a cabin fire. He pulled up outside and for a short while sat looking nervously at the number on the door. "Come on, Robert," he muttered several times in a mantra of well-spoken determination. "Come on, Robert. Come on, Robert." He looked at his face in the slight mirror above him, immaculate, well shaven with a sharp razor, hair cropped and in place to the very last, face moisturised, and for a man of 42, nearly morning snow smooth without a single wrinkle around the eyes. And it was the eyes. It's always the eyes. The eyes, he whispered as he looked through and into them. He could see weariness around them, ashen bags barely concealed with cream, the cracked veins like red amongst the marble, pupils broad with tablets. "Oh well," he mustered. "Here goes." Now Robert Clay's nervousness was palpable. It was apparent in the tremulous shudder of his voice and the slight motor clumsiness of his actions. He felt, he concluded, as he had done the very first time he'd approached the door to collect a date. In the moments that his finger compressed the doorbell, he tried to remember quite when that was. Perhaps 14 or 15 years of age, maybe younger, maybe older. He wasn't sure. In fact, rather than being able to remember the girl, he could simply remember her youth, the smooth roundness of her face, hair of unfurled silk and eyes. Eyes and eyes and eyes, he thought. Eyes again. Eyes of youth that only ever looked forward, the past to them being as tawdry as laundry yet to be washed. Through the frosted glass, the impossible waterfall of her home, he saw the rumour of a figure approaching. He saw the ghostliness that we all see through such doors. He saw a shape that was being constantly disfigured by the style of the window, a blur smeared in an unseen hallway approaching like a broken star towards him. The door opened slowly, and there, emblazoned with the subtle light of candles, stood a young woman with a pale china face that seemed to fall towards him, like a feather dislodged from the wing of a dove. For a moment his nervousness silenced him. It held him. He couldn't believe how young she seemed, perhaps only 20, 25. Of course they'd spoken before this, online, by phone. He'd seen pictures, but somehow, he expected her to be older. "Robert," she asked, her voice somewhere between a whisper and a song. Yes, he said blankly after a moment as he stood fixated, taking her in. "I'm Marianne." "Of course," he suddenly blurted out. "I'm sorry for my slow-wittedness, just nerves, I'm afraid. I've never done anything like this before." "No," Marianne said, lifting her long coat from the wall. "I'd imagine you haven't." They both laughed a little. A small, silly noise emitted from two mouths cut into faces that housed minds beset by night-time. "I've booked the restaurant for 8. I hope that's okay," Robert asked, the ignition of his year-old car purring gracefully into flight. 8? "Sure, that's perfect," Marianne replied, the silken seatbelt pulled taut between her pallid breasts, the tops of which peeked intriguingly from the falling V of her dress. And what a dress it is, thought Robert Clay as he looked sideways at his companion in the fleeting brightness of street lamps. She was beautifully turned out. Her dress, maroon and silver in parts, patterned like the cosmos it seemed. Occasional flames of golden material burned just enough to make her slender figure smoke. Her smooth legs were coiled in a polite cross, The exposed knees were spotless, no grazes, scars or cuts. They were like dual breezes blowing upwards from the road. Robert used the mirrors to see her face as it looked outwards towards the affluent side of the blue city. She was slight, svelte and tender. Her cheekbones leant thoughtfully outwards as she seemed to brood over the pavements, tree lines and expensive homes. She had full lips, although she seemed to have permanently indented the bottom one from biting it. Nervousness, nodded Robert. Her eyes were like his. Behind the applied colours of mascara and shadow, behind the angled lashes and behind the slight smile, there were two eyes of fatigue and inertia. He could see the small worms of broken vessels as they crawled languidly towards her thinking. Robert, Marianne whispered, looking over at her driver, what's the restaurant like? Have you been there before? It's a fine place. It's Michelin starred. I've been a few times, and I used to go with. And he paused, just for a moment, unsure of his words, of his language. Even for a moment, Robert Clay did not exist. Of course, said Marianne, her long fingers and small palm forming a hand that rested on Robert's knee with reassuring potency. It's a fine place, he reiterated, and I've been a good few times. Le Petit Malais stood immaculately as they arrived. The whiteness of the walls hit them both like blindness, enhanced as it was by occasional lighting. Trimmed privet bulbs lined the sanguine celebration of tasteful ornaments and unobtrusive water features that breathed wistfully in the background like well-behaved children. Robert parked his car on the pavement opposite the imposing figure of a 16th century church that stood at the centre of the intersection like a skeleton frozen in a pleading pose. He looked up at the endless stained glass and the crooked weathercock and the recent guttering. Marianne saw his look and wondered if it was fondness or sorrow. Robert, she asked, do you like the church? I was married there, he replied, before straightening his tie and taking her covered arm in a slow stroll toward the restaurant. They sat on a leather sofa just inside the portico and they perused the menu of expensive words, neither carrying an appetite as such. Robert ordered a bottle of champagne and Marianne nodded her thanks as a glass of spotless crystal was pressed into her gentle hand by the waiter. Neither could truly decide what to order and, in a moment of realised abandon, Robert Clay merely ordered everything. The staff were somewhat taken aback, but with the nature of their training they smiled, complimented, cowered and left as the maitre d' showed them to a table by a window to the night. For a time, as the first glasses of champagne were slowly emptied, the conversation was nothing. It was empty, it was banal, it was chatter. It was a silence so heavy that they both slouched in their quilted chairs. It was awkward, the uncomfortable thud of quiet within a sociable place, of weeping amidst the laughter. However, once the copious starters of mussels, scallops, cured meats and soups began to arrive, both Robert and Marianne smirked mirthfully with the ridiculousness of it all. Can you believe it? Marianne said, tasting the bacon-fried flesh of a scallop. Our table looks almost kingly, like a banquet. Indeed it does, sparked Robert, as he sucked the orange meat of a mussel from a shell sautéed with bubbling liquor. This food, Marianne whispered, it's incredibly expensive. I'm not sure that we... Shush, Robert said, cutting her off with a reassuring smile. Enjoy it all, please. I can cover the expense. No problem. I'll use my credit card. I suppose, Marianne replied, scrunching her nose in a snigger, the pearl bubbles of the champagne exploding like firecrackers in her throat. Over more drinks, over morsels presented in pots no more than thimbles, over tired eyes and under lights that grew darker with the hours. Amidst it all, the couple began to talk more. I expected you to be older, Robert said in a sip. Older, Marianne replied, but you knew my age from the emails and from the forum. I know, he said, rubbing the bridge of his nose, it's just, well, I can't quite understand why you would have to do something like this. Now, Marianne didn't answer at first. Her voice was a robin that had flown into brush. Something vivid and important vanished momentarily amongst a world of wilted leaves. I'm not sure that age really comes into it, she replied confidently after the pause. I mean, you're 42 and that's no age at all. Yes, Robert sighed, it's no age at all. I think I know why you're doing this, Marianne added, now more sure of herself. Really, he replied, slightly absent, lost in napkins and implements that glisten like bullets. Yes, she continued, and I hope I'm not being presumptuous. Go on. Your wife, she proffered. A little more timid than before. You lost your wife and... I did, replied Robert, his answer staccato in delivery. I did. I lost her, and well, the thought of almost anything seemed impossible. And then Marianne looked understandingly, her head tilted, brunette roses on her shoulder. And then I met you via the site, and suddenly I felt as if I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And he rushed the last couple of words, almost not wanting to say them at all, but her face, the slender paleness, the tired eyes searching for something in him. What about you? He murmured inquiringly, the liquor beginning to dull his keen senses with its murky tongue. You seem to have me pegged, yet I've no idea why you'd need to do this. Doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, did you have someone? No, Marianne answered quietly. I had no one. I never had someone, and that perhaps is why I would do something like this. But you could get someone. You could have someone, Robert replied, almost as if he was trying to dissuade her from the evening that was already in motion. No, she whispered softly. I can never have anyone without this. And they both sat quietly, aware of the other, but even more aware of themselves and the crumbling caves of their hearts filling quickly with silt and sand. And after a short while, Robert Clay glanced outwards at the church, and the one simplicity of it as it stood there illuminated by the many windows of distant homes, the pointed architecture and innate permanence it seemed to have, its melancholic manipulation, the manifold ceremonies it contained, and the assurances uttered between the bricks that over time unravelled like cotton set to be taken by the wind. All of this, he thought, all of this made it seem human. Marianne, shall we get the bill? Now the car engine grew into a slow growl. Robert Clay thought about the day he purchased it every single time he ignited the machine. It was the first time he'd ever bought a brand new car, and it was the first time that he'd ever wanted to. In fact, as he drove, he and Marianne past the affluent priories and out into a looming countryside, he wasn't even sure that he'd wanted to buy it either then. He remembered wanting to feel something. He recalled that he was bereft of any meaningful sensation, and he thought perhaps buying a brand new automobile would give him a jolt of exhilaration. He recalled pulling away from the dealership, the smells of new paint and upholstery that proved the cost. He remembered the handling being taut, and how during the last year he'd eased it all up by driving sometimes ceaselessly through the night until his exhaustion forced him to park up and sleep. Robert, Marianne questioned from the passenger seat a million miles away. Is it a secluded spot? Oh, very much so, he whispered, his raw eyes fixed to a road that grew ever more empty as the minutes ticked away. Is it much further? She inquired distractedly. Not really, he replied. Perhaps 10 minutes. Marianne Louise Mendelssohn sat like unspun wool next to Robert Clay as he focused on the dizzying darkness of the drive. She felt very little. She used to imagine that she could feel something, but eventually, like winter follows the flames of autumn, she realised that she still felt nothing at all. She played many games, spun many reels, tried against herself to pretend that she felt things for people, for possessions and for the world itself, but in the styrofoam mornings of plywood cereal and endless muzak, she felt as numb as all the frozen fingers in the world. She tried to build love like a child builds bricks, naive fingers trying against gravity to manipulate towers that could touch the sun. But they always fell away to the carpet or to the soil, didn't they? These towers children build, they never last, the wind takes them. And the past to Marianne was a gaping hole, a wound that had never hurt, but had never healed, a rip in the sky where no stars seek to shine. And she was fine with that. She understood it. To not feel is ultimately liberating, she thought. There are no walls in the night. We're here, Robert said blankly as he pulled the car into the small arc through the remains of a gate that led to a long abandoned farmland. They drove on for a short while, perhaps 1,000 feet. The lights of the blue city itself were nearly invisible now. They were flecks of white on a suit of black. They'd passed through conurbations of homes, some exclusive and wealthy, others all beaten brick and TV aerials. But even they were distant glows now. Are you ready? Robert asked after a few moments of silence. Yes, she replied, unclipping her seatbelt and letting it retract like a slim, black tongue. Are you going to undress?" she asked. I can't see why I would," he replied, a little confused by the question. "Well, to keep your new and nice suit neat, I suppose," she said from under her hair, fallen as it was across the slender poem of her face. It's tailored, he replied, before once again staring absently out to the drawn rural curtains. "Are you at least going to loosen them?" she whispered. No, he snapped. "No, I'd like to remain smart," he confirmed as he opened the door and he stepped out. Now Robert Clay walked towards the rear of his car and he breathed heavily and felt the slow chill of the hour sweep into him on icy bristles. The boot opened with a smooth motion, almost sympathetic. He reached in and lifted the hose out with a trembling hand, and being careful not to put his knee in the mud, he knelt down and fixed one end to the exhaust pipe. As he walked towards the driver's door, he felt his legs wobble, and for a moment he had to hold the roof to stay upright. He slumped onto his seat, and with his window lowered, he closed the door and drew the other end of the hose inside. He started the engine and thought once again of when he'd bought the car only a year ago. He compressed the button and the window rose slowly until the hose was held tightly between the glass and the frame, and then, his breathing fast, he reclined next to Marianne. The fumes began to seep into the car in flumes of rolling ash. Marianne had for the most part looked straight ahead towards a sky that she'd never truly thought about. Robert was breathing faster than her, and she could feel the tremor of his hands as they desperately felt for somewhere to lie. And she turned that slight face towards him and caught his tired eyes with hers, and as the space between them filled with the wreaths of smoking flowers, she took his dancing hand in hers, and they felt peace amongst the metal. Okay, thank you. That was Company. Yeah, it's always been a story that seems to have gone down okay. Understandably, it's not one that I've ever really read live when doing gigs in pubs and so forth. This is not the kind of thing that that necessarily rounds off a jolly evening. But I have read it live once. I did a show for a literary festival. It's about a year ago now, 2 years ago, and they wanted me to do something about romanticism, about romantic writing, and unconventionally, I think my writing could be considered romantic in a kind of like a Baroque sense. Some of the stories like that, at least. So I read it then, and actually got heckled by a priest who was in the audience, which I didn't expect. But he seemed to have taken offence at the fact that I was reading too quickly, then too quietly, then too loudly, and to the point when he just started to bark. He's a very old man. He may not have been a priest at all, actually. He was wearing a collar, but that doesn't mean anything. Either way, I detract. I hope you like the story, and when I post the video in a little while, I'll post a link to the short film so you can see it if you'd like to. But as always, thank you very much, and sorry about the delay with putting a video up this week. I'm up to my neck at the minute with typing up the first full edit of the new novel, The Disaffection Agent, and I've started another novel whilst doing this called Terminal Island, which you'll find out more in the coming weeks. But thanks as always, take care, look after yourselves, and see you the next time. Bye bye.